You read those headlines sometimes. Sudden CEO changes, big board shakeups. Makes you wonder what's really happening behind the scenes, doesn't it?
It really does. And often it points right back to the boardroom culture itself.
Which is exactly what we're digging into today for you, the learner.
Mm-hmm. We've gone through this really interesting YouTube transcript. It's from the Boardroom Masterclass called Building a Dynamic Boardroom Culture. Tone at the top, mood in the middle, fervor at the bottom.
And it wasn't just, a light chat. They had some heavy hitters, corporate governance experts from JKC, Ligamec Advocates, Stedman Global, KY.
Yeah, a really solid panel. So our mission here is to pull out the practical insights. How do you actually build a healthy boardroom culture?
And why does it matter so much? How does it ripple out? And what are the red flags?
Exactly. So let's start at the beginning. What is this thing we call boardroom culture? Jaffes Cotto offered a pretty grounded definition.
Right. He talked about culture being dynamic, like the things you do every single day, repeatedly.
Precisely. And I thought his personal examples were quite powerful. Prayer, open communication at home, building trust. He suggested those same basics apply in the boardroom.
It makes it less abstract, doesn't it?
Mm.
Which brings us to that framework Jackie Namara, the moderator, mentioned. Tone at the top.
Mood in the middle, fervor at the bottom. Yeah, it paints a picture of that ripple effect.
So the board sets the tone. That influences management's mood.
Which then affects the energy, the passion, the fervor right down through the organization.
But, like Jackie pointed out, that ideal picture, well, it often clashes with those dramatic headlines we mentioned. She even brought up Greek mythology.
Yeah, a reminder that, egos and power dynamics are very real forces in some boardrooms. It's not always harmonious.
So that leads back to Japheth's point. Why is that tone at the top just so vital?
Because it's essentially the company's compass. Morally, ethically, behaviorally. If the board acts with integrity, with transparency, with respect, that sets the standard.
Okay, so the board is the compass. But how do you actually, set it? You can't just decree a good culture.
No, you can't. And Candy Wakesa Okaboy really nailed this. She said, you model it, your actions speak volumes.
The character of leader idea.
Exactly. Or, as she put it, how power is used to punish, promote, or permit if board members are, say, always late, unprepared. That sends a message, right?
Definitely. A message of disrespect, really. But how does that individual behavior, travel across a big company where the board barely interacts with most people?
That's the tricky part. And Candy highlighted that the mood in the middle, the senior and middle managers, it's not uniform.
Right. You've got finance, maybe marketing, operations. They could all have slightly different vibes, different subcultures.
Totally. Finance might be very risk-averse. Sales might be high energy. So the board's overall tone, its decisions, its demonstrated values, those are the signals that filter down.
Okay, so the board provides the overarching direction, the values.
And senior and middle management interpret and translate that within their own teams. But Candy made a key distinction. Boardroom culture and organizational culture, while linked, aren't exactly the same thing.
Got it. Now, Rachel Dumba brought in some really interesting perspectives from her childhood. Tell us about that training carriages thing.
Oh, yeah, that was quite vivid. Her father was the train, the kids were the carriages.
Meaning?
Meaning each carriage, each person had to be accountable. If one detached, the train kept going. It's about individual responsibility within the collective, just like on a board.
Makes sense. And what about the raised by a village concept? How does that fit?
That speaks more to the joint accountability. In a village, everyone looks out for the kids. In the boardroom, the chair leads, but also, as Rachel said, calls the rest of us board members to order. It's a shared duty.
Interesting. She also stressed respecting everyone, especially those, at the bottom. Why is that crucial for the board's culture?
Because it fuels that fervor. If people feel seen and respected by leadership right from the top, it builds energy, passion, motivation throughout the entire organization. It connects back.
So, putting these pieces together, what does a healthy board culture actually look like day to day? Rachel mentioned being on very good boards.
Key thing she mentioned, listening, really listening to each other, and appreciating that management actually knows the operational details better than the board does.
So the board stays strategic, doesn't meddle in operations.
Exactly. It empowers management to run with decisions and, importantly, gives praise when it's due.
She also had those nice examples of just being normal.
Yeah.
Greeting people, not pulling rank with titles.
Yeah, breaking down those barriers, being approachable. But it's not just about being nice, it's about adding real value. Each member speaking up, using their expertise, challenging assumptions, including their own.
Right, which leads us nicely into biases and blind spots. Jackie mentioned a PwC piece on this.
She did. And Japheth really echoed the importance of the board remembering they're always being watched. Those in the middle and those below are looking at you.
Constant awareness. It reinforces that need for ethical conduct, transparency.
Within appropriate limits, of course. You can't air everything, but the principle of openness matters.
And what about that danger Rachel mentioned, the board going micro, getting lost in the weeds?
Oh, that's a huge risk. When the board gets bogged down in operational details, they lose strategic focus. Their job is the big picture: purpose, vision, mission, values, strategy, not micromanaging.
And those specific PwC biases Jackie named, what were they again?
Okay, there was authority bias deferring too much to the perceived expert or leader. Groupthink, wanting harmony so much that you don't critically examine ideas.
Right.
Status quo bias, just resisting change because it's changed.
Yeah.
And confirmation bias,
Yeah.
favoring info that confirms what you already think.
And Candy's take was that these biases kind of force everyone into the same mold.
Exactly. They stifle that diversity of thought, which is so crucial. She argued for focusing on principles and values rather than trying to force one single culture. Let different perspectives flourish.
Japheth made a similar point, didn't he? About allowing debate, not letting one person dominate.
Yes, he warned against the chair or a specific expert just holding court. And his Boeing example, wow, a chilling reminder of what can happen when different views aren't heard.
Okay, so that's the healthy side and the potential pitfalls. But what about when things go really wrong? What are the signs of a genuinely toxic boardroom?
Candy described it pretty vividly. Pervasive mistrust, gossip replacing real communication, people just paralyzed, focused on surviving, not working.
And management might just check out, abdicate responsibility.
Exactly. Which can then tempt the board to overstep even more, trying to fill the vacuum, making things worse.
She also noted how board members might unknowingly contribute by not respecting boundaries.
Yeah, being enthusiastic, wanting to help, but actually stepping on management's toes. It creates confusion, resentment. It's a slippery slope.
In Rachel's example, 54 board meetings in a year. In the public sector.
54. I mean, that just screams dysfunction, plus misuse of resources, poor accountability, and the impact on staff morale. Terrible.
It wasn't just actions, though. Candy also talked about language. How can words introduce toxicity?
It's insidious. Harsh language, disrespect, constant negativity. It can slowly become normalized. It lowers the bar for behavior across the board.
Like her example of the CEO using offensive language.
Yeah, the board has to step in there. That's non-negotiable. It sets a dangerous precedent otherwise.
So if a board realizes, uh-oh, we're heading this way or we're already there, what can they actually do?
Well, Japheth emphasized self-reflection. Boards need to ask themselves tough questions regularly.
And training. Does that help?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Training agendas must include board culture and organizational culture, and you need mechanisms to deal with members who are out of line.
How?
Start with direct conversations. If that doesn't work, it might need escalating, maybe even involving shareholders. It's tough, but necessary.
Do board evaluations help catch this stuff?
They absolutely should. Good evaluations probe cultural health. And recruitment is key too. Look for fit, not just flashy credentials. Ask about values, teamwork.
It's odd, though. Companies have HR processes for staff, but often not clear ways to discipline board members.
That's a common weakness. And toxicity often comes from self-interest or people representing outside agendas rather than the company's best interests. You have to address those root causes.
Okay, Harriet Mong asked about middle management, that crucial link. How do they bridge the top and bottom effectively?
Rachel's advice was pretty clear. Middle managers should generally go through the CEO when communicating upwards to the board.
Why? To avoid confusion or undermining the exec team?
Precisely. And boards shouldn't really be calling junior staff directly either. Maintain the proper channels.
But Candy argued the board needs the middle managers to actually embed the culture, right, since the board is removed.
Yeah. Yes, there's a tension there. The board needs to empower middle management as culture carriers, equip them, trust them, but direct lines can get messy. And Candy stressed, culture change isn't a project. It's long-term, consistent effort. The fish rots from the head, as the saying goes.
So how do you even measure something like culture? It feels so intangible.
It is tough. Japheth mentioned that U.S. survey 37% think their culture is toxic. It's worrying. It shows the need to try and measure it.
How, though?
Candy suggested focusing on trends, not just single data points. Maybe staff surveys, exit interviews, specific cultural indicators reported directly to the board, not just filtered through management.
And how do you equip the execs and managers to actually cascade the culture downwards? Rachel talked about retreats.
Yeah, annual board and management retreats are great for building relationships and getting aligned on strategy and culture. And simple things matter. Respect in board meetings towards management, amongst members. No sideboard meetings.
Those secret chats outside the main meeting.
Exactly. Undermines trust. And fundamentally, board members just need to learn to listen. Really listen.
We also had some specific questions. Josephine Inose asked about dealing with a very powerful CEO. Any thoughts there?
Japheth leaned towards the board having the power to appoint the CEO rather than external appointment to help maintain that balance of power and accountability.
And Grace J. Kavuma asked about lead directors. Is that common?
Not formally, Japheth said, in their local context anyway, but chairs often have a trusted go-to member for independent counsel.
Grace also asked about assessing fit during recruitment, which we touched on, and how the board gets the feel from the bottom.
Right. Assessing fit needs deliberate interview questions about values and behavior. Getting the feel involves those cultural metrics we talked about, maybe board walkarounds, ensuring reports aren't overly sanitized.
Alan Rucka-Coco had a critical one. Board responsibility if internal controls fail. When does the board step over management?
Candy clarified that delegation isn't abdication. If there's credible evidence of serious issues, negligence, wrongdoing, the board must retrieve that delegated authority to protect the company. It's their fiduciary duty.
And the toughest question, maybe.
Hmm.
How do you actually sack a non-performing board member or chair?
Candy stressed having clear exit clauses in appointment letters. Without that groundwork, it becomes incredibly messy and damaging. Plan for the end at the beginning.
Okay, wrapping this up, if you had to boil it down, what are the absolute key takeaways for the learner on boardroom culture?
1. Tone really starts at the top. Board behavior sets the standard, period.
Okay.
2. Actively cultivate listening and diverse perspectives. It's your best defense against bias and groupthink.
Makes sense.
And 3, this isn't a fix-it-and-forget-it thing. It
Yeah.
needs constant, conscious effort, self-assessment, and modeling the right behaviors. Always.
So a final thought then for everyone listening. In whatever group you're part of, a board, a team, anything, what's one small thing you could intentionally do starting today to help strengthen its culture?
Something to reflect on. And you can always find more detail in that original Boardroom Masterclass discussion if you want to go deeper.
Absolutely. Huge thanks to the experts involved in that session for sharing their insights. And thank you, the learner, for joining us on this deep dive.